Hey friends, today I wanted to go over some of my favorite sewing tools and how I think that maybe they could help you too. What do I use them for? And how many do I have? Hopefully, some of these will help you on your sewing journey too. So first we'll go over cutting tools. Now, in order from smallest to kind of largest, we'll talk about these just a little bit. So here is a pair of embroidery snips. If you can see, this tip is just slightly curved. This means that I can get that tip right onto the edge of my fabric, and I can snip that thread fairly close to the edge of the fabric. So these are always really handy to have. Next, these are a pair of Kai 4-inch snips, and I really like this brand. They stay super sharp and you can sharpen them. These are about 4-inch. And these particular pair, sometimes I'll use for cutting thicker threads. Sometimes I will use them to trim seam allowances off after I've sewn them. And they also will cut through about 12 layers of denim in a fully lapped seam. And super strong, really like these particular scissors. These are a pair of Guggenheim, I believe they are 9.5-inch scissors, or they measure about 9 1/4. They're probably a 9-inch. It's got just a little over, let's measure this out, just under a 4-inch blade on that. These are the ones that I'm typically using to cut fabric and denim. I will also use these on occasion to trim seam allowances. And if you get yourself a good pair of scissors that you can have resharpened, these are a great pair to have. You don't necessarily have to go as expensive as the Guggenheim, but if you want them to last a long time, you're going to want to spend a little bit more. I eventually am going to get another pair of tailor scissors that are about 11 inches, larger blade, larger cutting area. This is a Quilter Select rolling cutter. Now, one of the things I love about this particular color, number one, it's fairly hefty and you can hold it very easily in your hand. The other thing I like is there's a button here. You just push it, you remove your blade guard. You can just tap the button, tap the edge, your blade comes out. If you have the button let go, you can tap it back and the blade is recovered. The other nice thing is this particular cutter you can swap to either hand. It is either right or left-handed. So if I wanted to use it this direction, I could, or if I wanted to use it on the opposite side, I could. Really amazing cutter. Then obviously one other thing you want to have is a good cutting mat. Now this particular one is only about 13 inches by about 10 inches. It has 9 by 12 measurements on it. I think this is the smallest one I have. They do make a lot of other sizes. I have them all the way up to a 30 by 60 that I have on my main work table. But you will want to have some sort of a good cutting mat, especially if you're using a rolling cutter like this. So now we have some measuring tools here, and there are a couple of different kinds. Number one, the cutting board does have measurements on it. These are mainly in inches. One of the things that I really like are these Quilter Select rulers. Now I don't particularly follow a brand, but these are some of the best rulers I've ever found. I think they're very accurate, and especially if you're cutting, you want perfectly straight lines. They're easy to use with a rolling cutter. The other thing I like is this back section is a little bit sticky, so it sticks to your fabric so that your ruler doesn't slide around as you're trimming. You'll want to have these in all different sizes, sometimes down from 2 inches square all the way up to, I have a 6.5 by 24, and I can cut across a full bolt of fabric with that particular ruler. It makes cutting long edges really, really simple and clean and straight. So the next thing I have is a metal ruler here, and I use this one a lot for drafting. Now you'll see it has both inches and metric. And I really love this because with the metric I can get much more precise. I do a lot of my patterns in metric versus in inches. I think it's just easier to do. The math isn't as complicated, especially if you're going with fractions. But this is probably a tool that you'll want to have. This is a fabric measuring tape, so a flexible measuring tape. And this one in particular, one side is inches and the other side is metric. So this is really great if you're doing some measurements, but you want to do the measurements in inches, but you want to use metric. You can just mark your spot, flip it over, and there you have your metric measurement. So this is a really great tool to have, especially if you're going to be creating patterns from scratch. The next tool that we have is a seam gauge. Now, this particular gauge, you can slide it either direction. So if you want a 1/2 inch seam, you can slide it right up to the edge. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be measuring from the edge of your fabric, and then your turnover would be right, at the end, the raw edge of the fabric would be right at this end. So you're measuring from the seam outward. You can also do it the reverse direction, have this red thing on the raw edge of the fabric and measure your seam outward that direction. I particularly like having these in both metric and imperial, so I can get more accurate with my seams, and then I can work a lot more patterns and not have to do any conversions. So this side is imperial, this side over here, this is metric. Always shoot for accuracy with your seams. Fastening tools. So there's a couple of different kinds that I have here, and I use them for different purposes. So these are clips. And the thing I particularly love about clips is that they're super simple to use. And you can slide them under the fabric and clip your fabric together. And then if you've seen in some of my other videos, as I'm working on a piece of fabric sewing a seam, I can just press on the edge and slide it right off the seam. And you can just slide them to the edge on your free arm, on your sewing machine. These are fantastic, especially if you're doing long seams. And as you can see, I have a lot of them. Next thing is pins. Now, there's a couple of different kinds of pins. These are just regular dressmaker's pins. I have a crap ton of them. And then these ones are a glass top pin. And the reason why I like these glass top pins is because typically I can see them a little bit better. But I do like these dressmaker pins. Now, let's see if we can show the difference between these two. They're a different length. The dressmaker's pins are just a slight bit smaller. And so these are particularly good if you're putting in sleeves on shirts or with a delicate fabric. They're easy to use, and I would actually recommend using pins versus using clips if you are setting in sleeves, because you can stretch out that ease a little bit more in the fabric, disperse it a little bit more easily when you're using pins versus using clips. So these are some marking tools that I have, and there are different purposes for them. Obviously, this is a glass pattern weight, and I really like these for holding down my pattern on top of my fabric or holding my fabric in place when I'm cutting around it after I have already marked it. A set of 8 of these is about 30 bucks on Amazon. They're really inexpensive. Then, of course, we have tailor's chalk. Some brands hold together better than others. I do like this particular tailor's chalk. I have it in multiple colors. You do want different colors to work on different colored fabric. White is not always going to be your best option, although it's used very, very frequently. It comes in blue, red, and yellow as well. So this is just a regular silver pen. It's a gel pen. This particular pen I use on a bunch of different fabrics, and I use it when I need to make some sort of a dot or a line on darker fabric, and it goes away very easily. It is permanent, but you won't see it after a first wash. This is one of the Pilot G2 pens, and it's actually my favorite brand of writing pen as well. But the silver one I use particularly for marking dark fabrics. This particular pen is another one for fabric marking. Now, the difference in this one is also a friction pen. So this one will erase, or it will go away with heat, for example, an iron. But you're not necessarily going to be able to see this on a lighter fabric. It may darken a line just a little bit on a lighter fabric. This one will mostly work on some lighter cottons and things like that. I do use it occasionally for drawing a line where I need to sew, if I'm working on smaller detailed work. This is a very, very handy one to have. The one that I use most frequently for any kind of marking is this particular friction pen from Pilot, and this ink is blue. Now, I like the ones that have the caps on them like this because they dry out less frequently than the ones that you can just click and pop the tip out. I like this particular pen a lot better. Again, this does remove with heat, or you can use this little silicone tip down here and you can rub against it like an eraser and it will remove the line. But these are super handy for marking fabric. So these two particular tools, I will call them miscellaneous tools, and they're really, really simple to use. So this particular tool is a point turner, and you see it has a ball tip down at this end, so as you're running across your seam, it's not going to jab through the fabric. This comes in a lot of different sizes. I use this one in particular for poking out the corners of collars, or if you have a nice sharp corner on a cuff or something like that, you can get that right into that corner and poke that edge out. And this is a great tool. You can also use it to rub your seams open. So if you have a seam and you want to actually split the seam all the way open, you can rub this right down the center where your stitching is, and that seam will lay open nice and flat. This particular tool is a seam ripper and stiletto that my sister made for me. She's a wood turner. So on this side, I have a stiletto, and I like this particular tool because I can use it to pick out stitches if I need to. That tip will get right under the edge of the stitches and I can pull them out, or if I have the seam open just a little bit, I can slip it underneath there and pull one set of thread at a time versus having to cut them. This I can also use underneath the presser foot to manipulate my fabric for a more precise seam, or if I'm, have a little bit of a gather, I can use it to keep that fabric pressed down right underneath the edge of my presser foot. So that is the stiletto. And then on the other side, it has a seam ripper. Now this is a little bit larger seam ripper than most, but as you can see, it does have the ball here at the end, and then it's got the cutting feature right here. It does have a little bit of a sharp tip. And this is just, if you sew and you haven't become familiar with a seam ripper, I believe that you will be intimately familiar with them after, so many hours of sewing. This is always a great tool to have. And also, don't ever be afraid to rip out a seam. Just remember, it's only fabric, and we all make mistakes. So I hope today's video helped you on your sewing path, and I hope the explanation was clear. The one thing I want to point out is, please just remember, buy the best tool that you can afford. Don't necessarily buy the most expensive, but buy the best tool that you can afford. Test several of them out. Find out what's comfortable in your hand. What do you like? What do you not like? Before you decide to purchase. And as always, happy sewing.